Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me this time. It looks like I have it plugged in and everything's working correctly this morning. So hopefully there's no technical difficulties or issues. So we are back for part three of the Admiral Byrd series, which is technically a prequel to the last two episodes we've done, which I highly recommend. If you haven't watched those, go back and watch those because this one, well, I technically you don't have to because this one's a prequel, but it will help if you did watch those so you kind of know what we're getting into today. If you're new to the channel, this is kind of like a book club thing that I'm doing, and we're covering this book, Genesis for the Space Race to Inner Earth and Extraterrestrials by John B. Leith. He's a former military and CIA officer, and he co-wrote this book with a researcher named Frank Hudson. This material was written in 1980. The book somehow remained unpublished until 2013, and there's a whole controversy about the material, and it was stolen by some lady who authored it and under a different title for a period of time. So anyway, it's game-changing information about the true history of what happened here in the United States and Germany, and basically all over the world as far as the history of ufology and a true genesis for the space race, meaning, how we got to space and how we actually developed these flying saucer programs and what that story looked like and how those events unfolded. And it's far more interesting than they're trying to tell us. And, we're on the cusp of some major alien disclosure right now, which is really interesting. So, this channel, I think, is important to kind of build a new foundation for people who are just getting into this to help, help make sense of the chaos and the confusion, because that's all it is when you look out there. Welcome, 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 everybody. Story time. Yeah, it's story time. So, actually, next, I think I'm going to get into the Sands of Time series again. I'm going to take a break from this material. We can go on and on. I can do 100 episodes on this topic, this book alone, but other books that corroborate it. But I'm going to take a break from it and go back into the Sands of Time material because it's a little more prevalent as far as what is happening right now directly with the UFO alien disclosure. So I think I might go in this book three of Sands of Time. So stay tuned for that. But this today, we're getting into basically a pre-high jump reconnaissance mission that Admiral Byrd went on, basically to scope out. They wanted to find, first of all, find the South Pole entrance. Admiral Byrd had been to the North Pole entrance years prior and flown inside of the Earth at the North Pole, but they were looking for the South Pole entrance because they had intel that the Germans had fled there during and after World War II. And what this book doesn't cover, which is interesting because I'm starting to see a big picture being painted here, a clear picture being painted here. So this book has a lot of great information, but it's only part of the truth. And you have to read other books and start connecting the dots on your own. This book doesn't talk about an operation called Operation Tabarin. It was a Russian reconnaissance mission. Operation Tabarin was the code name for a secret. I'm sorry, not well, British expedition, not Russian. Sorry. Operation Tabarin was the code name for a secret British expedition to the Antarctic during World War II, operational from the years of 1943 to 1946, designed to establish bases in Antarctica. But what they were really doing was the British were there looking for the German bases that they had heard rumor of, and they found them. And they had the first time around, a lot of the guys lost their lives, and the second time around, I think only one survivor, and he made it back with the intel, and then they sent another group back, and eventually that information made it to President Truman, who then sent Admiral Byrd to the South Pole to go find out, okay, for ourselves. We had this data. They kind of knew where they were going, but they wanted to go see if the Germans had set up shop, and allegedly Hitler was still alive, and they were looking for him where he fled to. So that part isn't covered in this book. It's interesting because it's a key, crucial aspect of the story. How did they even get the intel to know? So it came from the British, and there's a whole lot more to the story. And just a side note, um, earlier chapters in this book talk about the German flying saucer program. Well, we know from the Sands of Time material that the Vril Damen were very much involved and helping the Germans develop a flying saucer, and they were like channeling blueprints, and there's that whole side of the story. But there's another aspect of it that, so in 1938, there was a downed flying saucer in Germany. Whether they shot it down or it crash landed, that's still debatable. But it ended up being a Venusian flying saucer, like the silver disc, like we're familiar with, like Victor 1 from the Valiant Thor testimony. Germany began immediately trying to reverse engineer this craft. And the, sorry, just going to check the chat real quick. Last time I didn't check the chat and there was an audio issue. So Germany had begun reverse engineering the flying saucers, that flying saucer in particular, and they were not having luck. They realized they didn't have the proper material to actually build the craft. They couldn't replicate the metal that was on this UFO that had crashed. But interestingly enough, the United States was working on an advanced alloy. And so at the same time, the United States had Navy spies in Germany during World War II. Germany had spies in the United States, and they were trying to figure out what this alloy was that the U.S. was developing because it turns out the U.S. had their own flying saucer program going on at the same time. Anyway, they had a lot of issues, and they never did successfully develop, reverse engineer that craft, but they did come up with a version of it, a very rudimentary version of it. And during the test flight, it did fly and it took off. They were about 10,000 feet in the air, and only to realize that they were probably going to be able to land. They weren't probably going to be able to land because of the design flaws that they were realizing in the air. So over above them came I'm sorry, a Venusian flying saucer. And it locked the German test flight into a tractor beam. And the Venusians came over their comms and basically said, "We've been watching you develop or attempt to reverse engineer our craft for quite some time. And here's why you were unsuccessful." And they just listed all the reasons. They said, first of all, the metal that you're using in the alloy is not light enough and not strong enough. It would never withstand the atmosphere. You have the motor wrong. You have the coil wrong. You're missing this. So they agreed. They said, we'll help you. We'll help you reverse engineer these, but you can't use them. You can't turn them into war machines. And there's a whole story there. So that was happening all at the same time that the Damen were helping another group of German scientists develop a flying saucer from the ground up with these channel blueprints, which is technically a completely different technology because we're talking about two different races of ETs helping. So there's more to the story. I'm saying all this because there's a picture being painted here, and it's all starting to make much more sense. And the Venusians played a key role in the history of ufology, and it seemed like they were very vested in helping not just the United States, Germany, anyone in the world um, get over the hump, that technological hump, and help us, develop free energy, anti-gravitic, craft, and unfortunately, we know how that story ended up. Nobody wanted to participate because everyone was more worried about warring with each other than actually freeing the planet. So I think Germany, I keep saying that. I think the Venusians finally just took a back seat to trying to help us. And now maybe they communicate with people individually, but that's where we're at today. So I'm going to not waste any more time here because we got about 22 minutes worth of audio to get through. I just kind of wanted to, set the foundation, set the stage for today's episode. And this is the reason I chose to put this chapter to do this one as part three instead of starting with this chapter because it technically is the prequel to the last two episodes. It's because it's more just to put the whole story in context, right? It's not the wowing information that the last two episodes covered, but it is crucial information to understand how this all developed and how it all played out. So really, I'm not going to chime in as much during this one. I'm going to let it play because it kind of is self-explanatory, but I will hop in here and there, but I'll play it and it's a fascinating story nevertheless, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So let me pull it up here and we will get started on this. Let me share my screen, share sound. Okay, share. And then All right, let's see. Let's do this.
Chapter 10. Admiral Richard E. Byrd finds the South Pole entrance to inner world. Hitler is alive! Those were the first words Joseph Stalin said to President Harry Truman and Prime Minister Churchill when a discreet moment was available at the 1945 Potsdam Conference. The body in the bunker was not that of Hitler, Stalin said. The hair, teeth, and fingerprints do not match. Then he gave complete autopsy details to the Prime Minister of England and the President of the United States. At the Potsdam Conference, it was agreed America would send the first expeditionary force to the Antarctic to look for the departed German leader and the missing nationals, who had left Berlin and Germany by various routes in late 44 and early 45. It was also agreed that as soon as preparations could be made, the United States would invade the Antarctic, and the old allies, including Russia, would stand by if further offensive action was needed once the Germans were located. Therefore, according to plan, the United States assembled its Russian and British-approved South Polar Expedition. Existence of the round-wing planes would remain secret, and only conventional weaponry would be deployed. The entire 1946 to 1947 operation was billed as the largest expedition ever sent to the Antarctic, and was given publicity for the media back home, rather than an attempt being made to keep the expedition a secret. It was also intended to establish a permanent U.S. base in the subcontinent, a move that had been delayed when the temporary American bases of 1939 and 1940 were abandoned because of the war. But although Admiral Byrd was the figurehead of the expedition, his real role was disguised. He would lead a search and find foray into the Antarctic, where it was assumed by many the German leader and his troops had retreated. An accompanying naval force out of Norfolk, Virginia, under Rear Admiral Richard H. included 13 warships, 19 planes, supply and transport vessels, equipped with helicopters and icebreaker to lead the way, and a submarine to aid in any type of underwater research or assistance. All vehicles were Caterpillar tread-type tractors, as these would be required to tow overland the sleigh and toboggan loads of building materials, Quonset huts, warehouse, weather stations, abundant food, clothing, and all accessories, especially fuel and oil, to transport a 4,000-man force in a hostile freezing land, where ice and snow was up to 2 miles in depth.
So there she's talking about Operation Highjump. But that was the plan for Highjump. But this what we're getting ready to get into was the recon mission before Highjump, the pre-Highjump expedition.
The Antarctic adventure was a full-scale naval and overland expedition, and in a real sense was a continuation of World War II, provided an enemy could be located in the 5.5 million square miles of Antarctic mountains and vast snowy wastes. At Christchurch in New Zealand, a branch station was set up as the midpoint for communications between McMurdo Sound, 2,365 miles away. Also at Christchurch, additional repair parts and supplies would be stored for eventual movement to Antarctic, where they would be required by the 4,000-man force. Byrd had a final meeting with the military in the United States, at which time, on orders of President Truman, he was forbidden to fly his own aircraft until he reached the Antarctic. The flight to McMurdo Base departed from the Hueneme, California base February 1st, and carried Byrd's co-pilot and navigator combined, radioman, and photographer representing the National Science Foundation and National Geographic Society. They set a course for Hawaii as passenger Byrd sat back reminiscing with his navigator. The following day, Admiral Byrd and his crew took off from Honolulu for the aircraft carrier, where his Antarctic plane was waiting to take them on the last leg of the journey into the South Pole region to find the whereabouts of the 250,000 Germans.
250,000 Germans. Think about that. There had been a very concerted effort to get Germany, the Germans out of Germany. And part of that reason was they were, they had promised the Venusians that they wouldn't build these flying saucers as war machines. So they did develop one that was a friendly machine, but Hitler wanted to arm these things, and he wanted to do it in secret, and he wanted to do it out of World War II territory. So they began bringing scientists and engineers and everybody needed in these programs down to the South Pole into Antarctica to establish bases to continue their research and development. So it's really interesting, that many people. And then there was a whole other agenda, to preserve the Aryan race. They were really only looking for pure-blooded Aryans because There was that whole thing, and then there was a cloning aspect where they were trying to, develop clones and clone Hitler. So there's a lot going on here at once.
On the fourth day after departure from Port Hueneme, Admiral Byrd arrived at McMurdo Base in the Antarctic, where his fixed-wing plane would be observed from a round-wing plane of German origin, hovering silently above the sound.
So right off the bat, they're already approached by a flying saucer.
Byrd's team had been the first to fly over the South Pole on November 29, 1929, and for him, this updated trip, of course, was no mere polar exercise. On this occasion, he was resolved to find the missing Germans. The irony surrounding the expedition's concept, however, was that while some planners were told it was a polar training expedition, Byrd knew from 3 former expeditions into the Antarctic that this trip would entail untold hazards and perhaps a lot more than a hidden valley, where rumors told of a German hideout or last stand. But it was Admiral Byrd's May 9, 1926 aerial expedition in search of the North Pole, accompanied by co-pilot Floyd Bennett, that first fired his zeal to return again and again to the polar ends of the Earth. It was Bennett who first awakened Byrd's imagination about the inner Earth being hollow, with possible entrances at both poles. Bennett had long noted an important similarity in all previous Arctic, North Pole accounts. The weather became warmer the farther north a traveler went. For instance, the log of Dr. Fridtjof Nansen, 1893 to 1896, seemed to show conclusive proof that the North Polar region was not a frigid ocean of ice. Nansen's conclusions read, "We have demonstrated that the sea in the immediate neighborhood of the pole, in all probabilities, lies in a deep basin, not a shallow one. The ice seemed to drift northerly, unimpeded." In 1980, NASA maps confirmed that the Arctic's ocean floor is a sloping depression beginning in northern Greenland and running about 2,200 miles. Actually, the incline of the ocean bed begins about the 85th parallel and eventually becomes the throat of the Arctic, which leads into the hollow Earth. The official released version of Byrd's 1926 flight from Spitsbergen to the North Pole is unimaginative and sterile. Byrd's log is reported to have recorded the following. "We reached the North Pole. After taking 2 sun sights and many pictures, we went on for several miles in the direction we had come and made another larger circle to be sure to take in the North Pole." Not disclosed in the official accounts is the following paraphrased but authentic record of that 1926 journey in its final hours.
So right now they're just recapping the North Pole expedition that happened years prior. And this is, they're getting ready to paraphrase what wasn't included in the diary, publicly anyway.
Bennett urged Byrd to proceed at their existing altitude over an ocean devoid of ice, the horizon of which seemed to enlarge beyond the 85th parallel. As they continued, the compass became erratic, the tailwind increased, and the sun's position sank lower. The tri-motored Ford plane continued only a short distance into this area of mechanical confusion and navigational uncertainty. Then, Byrd, becoming fearful, decided to turn back and head for base. They had seen and felt the unknown. From that day on, Byrd and Bennett, until his death in 1928, shared the same observations and determination. They had observed that the spherical Earth was concave at the so-called top of the planet, and that the Arctic Ocean apparently disappeared into an unending black hole. Before they reached base, they had resolved to return.
So they just said spherical planet with an entrance, a hole at the North Pole. Again, further information to validate the true shape of the planet. Not that, there's a whole controversy there about the flat Earth. And every day I have people reaching out trying to tell me that, the planets aren't in space, they're islands past the ice wall and all this very interesting stuff. And maybe in some weird consensus reality, that's true. But based on the historical evidence that we have, it seems to be that the planet is spherical with holes at each pole and it's inhabited. And the interior of our planet is honeycombed and hollow, and there's an artificial sun and it's inhabited.
During the following year, 1927, the author confirmed, Byrd and Bennett flew again to the top of the world, but this time they penetrated into the Earth's interior. Their new sponsor was the United States Navy. They departed in secret from an unknown base at an unknown time, and to this day, no official word of that flight has been made available to biographers or compilers.
So that you got to keep in mind, this was in 1980 when this information was put together. So since then, a lost Admiral Byrd diary has been released, where it tells the story of him and his co-pilot Bennett actually encountering an advanced group of people and with flying saucers and advanced technology. And he goes back and shares that information with the Pentagon, and they tell him never to talk about it again. So when he went to the South Pole, he was very well aware that the interior of the planet was already inhabited.
Byrd is reported to have flown a total of 1,700 miles, the most astonishing time of which was spent inside the Earth's interior. His diary of the event records sightings of what looked like prehistoric animals, green forests, mountains, lakes, rivers in a warm climate where tall, fair people waved to the flyers. Pictures of these interior locales were actually seen by the researcher. Richard Evelyn Byrd, descendant of an old Virginian family and who served in the U.S. Navy prior to World War I and as an aviation instructor during the war, was to become illustrious, in a tragic way. The panoramic evidence of that historic 1927 voyage was never to be shown or admitted to even exist. President Calvin Coolidge, on seeing the over 300 pictures and upon reading the log of the flight, said emphatically, "No one, absolutely no one, will believe this report. Let's keep it quiet. If we release the information, we will become the laughingstock of the nation and the world."
So think about that mentality. So they come back with 300 photographs that prove the existence of the hollow Earth and an advanced race living inside the planet. And they see the photos and laugh and say, no one's going to believe this. That will be the laughing stock of the nation if we release this. So they were more worried about being laughed at than they were about exposing the truth. And so they kind of talk about how really at the beginning there wasn't like a national security effort to hide this information. It was more because they just genuinely thought people wouldn't believe it. And if you read the Olaf Jansen Smoky God Inner Earth testimony when he came back in the early 1900s from his expedition of spending 2 years inside the planet, when he told his story, he was put in a mental institution, an insane asylum, and because of what he talked about. So you can't have the leader of a nation coming out and saying this stuff because at that time the mentality was if you talked about this taboo stuff, you were mental. So there was a really interesting, it was a really interesting reason to cover this up. Um, they didn't want to be the laughing stock of not just the nation, but of the world because people would have just thought we'd lost our minds. But eventually they realized the significance of what was down there, and then they had a whole new reason to maintain the secrecy. So let me continue this a little bit, back it up just slightly.
No one, absolutely no one, will believe this report. Let's keep it quiet. If we release the information, we will become the laughingstock of the nation and the world. President Coolidge was a New England realist. The decision to withhold the story of Byrd's epic journey was not a contrived cover-up. There was no national security involved. Others beside the president who saw the pictures and read the log simply believed that the phenomena of a world within a world was so fantastic as to be preposterous. A secretary to the late President Coolidge verified the official reaction. The pictures and log of that Byrd flight to the interior of the Earth were sealed and immediately placed in a vault at the Library of Congress.
So I need to explain something really quickly, how I found this book. These pictures they're talking about. I saw a video, this old man talking about Admiral Byrd's expedition into the Hollow Earth and coming back with 300 photos. And it was like a very dire message. And he looked concerned and scared for his life that he was even sharing this information. His name was John B. Leith. At the time, I had no idea who he was. I was like, okay, there's more to this story. Like this man is obviously, I could tell that he was telling the truth and that he was talking about these 300 photos that had been taken from inside the planet. So I get online, who's John B. Leith, and I'm researching him. He's a former military, CIA, blah, blah. Then I come across this book, Genesis for the Space Race. And instantly, I'm like, well, I'm buying this because, this seems like some information that is very pertinent to the history, to the story of our true history. So that's how I even discovered this book. And it was just from me researching this video that I saw on Instagram. And that's where we're at today. And now we're diving into this, and I'm hopefully filling in some blanks for people who have questions about this stuff.
They lay there untouched for 12 years. When World War II began, pictures and log of that Byrd flight to the interior of the Earth were sealed and immediately placed in a vault at the Library of Congress. They lay there untouched for 12 years. When World War II began, the secret account of Byrd's 1927 flight was reviewed and became classified under the name White Sheet Project. In the second year of the war, American intelligence in the executive branch realized the significance of another world within a world, especially when Jonathan Caldwell, on a training flight in a round-wing plane whose routing was over the North Pole, drifted into the black void which Byrd had come upon in 1927. Consequently, the Byrd flight, along with Caldwell's 1940 log, was relabeled the White Pole Project. When World War II hostilities ceased in 1945, the White Pole Project was placed under a new Navy department called Polar Archives, where it still operates in 1978 on the 6th floor of the National Archives. In the 1960s, NASA Archives became the repository for much of the polar activities because of the intense spacecraft action and related world research at the polar regions. With the reader made aware of the foregoing background information on Byrd's early Arctic exploits, we can now return to the circumstances surrounding his 1946 flight into the Antarctic, about which this chapter is mainly concerned. Before departure for that 1946 flight, the Navy allowed Byrd to add to his extensive first-hand knowledge of the Antarctic by perusal of newly acquired information taken from captured German records and books. Most believable to Byrd were the exploits and observations of German teams sent to the Antarctic from 1937 onward. These aerial and land teams had mapped and photographed much of the subcontinent, and the reports on their Antarctic findings were an engrossing study that had stimulated naval curiosity. Byrd was instinctively aware that the Germans would have preferred that these classified reports had not been moved to the Americas, for they gave helpful clues and conclusions about German intentions at the South Pole. Not all the classified information regarding the probes on the pole had been given Byrd, but the facts he had assimilated assured him that regardless of how incredible polar openings to the interior of the planet were regarded by those to whom he spoke, an entrance to the inner Earth could indeed exist, regardless of scientific opinion. The location of such an opening, if it existed, should be near the South Pole, beneath a cloud-covered area, which Byrd had observed in 1929, but had not been able to check. That possible site was east of the pole, on a line of flight nearby the L7 LST meridian. Reflecting again on his past polar accomplishments and the frustrations arising from government bureaucracy, Byrd was cognizant that 17 years after his last aerial trip to the South Pole, he and a new crew were now heading into the Antarctic again, perhaps to conclude once and for all times his polar adventures that might unravel the enigma of the subcontinent. From McMurdo, Admiral Byrd and his crew were flown to the aircraft carrier 300 miles north in the Antarctic waters. A final briefing took place, and the flight was scheduled for the following morning. Each man on the crew had taken an oath of secrecy. If they failed to return after a given period of time in the so-called Antarctic exercise, a massive emergency search was to be started.
So just to recap slightly, he flew to Hawaii first, if you remember that or from earlier. They flew to Honolulu, Pearl Harbor, and then from there they flew to an aircraft carrier off of Christchurch, New Zealand, I believe. And from that aircraft carrier, Byrd was able to take his plane to McMurdo Station, which had already been established in Antarctica. From McMurdo, then they fly to another aircraft carrier near the exact South Pole in these Arctic waters, where this flight will actually be taking off from, which is interesting because we're led to believe that it's just a solid ice continent, and this hole is in the middle of the ice. But it seems that there's still some ocean around the actual hole that he's about to fly into. So I guess it was the closest place to take off from because there were fuel restrictions and other things that would limit their flight time, which you're going to learn about here momentarily.
But regardless of the outcome, it was agreed not to inform the public of the true purpose of the excursion into the unknown. In the wisdom of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Byrd had not been told the secret of the round-wing plane which America then possessed. Byrd and his men checked out the conventional aircraft on which they had trained in the United States. It was called a Falcon, but had no relationship to the 1929 Falcon built by Curtiss Wright Aircraft Company. This particular aircraft had been specially constructed in 1946 for high speed and great endurance. The entire project under which it was conceived by the Navy, designed and rushed to completion, was top secret. The airplane's speed is unknown, but presumed to have been a good margin over 300 miles per hour. Its range was over 6,000 miles. The Pratt & Whitney engines were also carefully tuned, and all unused space in the aircraft was filled with extra gasoline containers, each filled with 100 gallons and tapped into the main fuel supply line to the engines. Extra food rations, because of their added weight, had been kept to a minimum. In case of emergency landing, there would be no hope of survival, particularly in the rarefied atmosphere of the mountain range that barred their path to the area of search in the South Pole region. For takeoff, the plane was over-heavy. Even with catapult assistance, the pilot had difficulty sustaining safe height. It became necessary to fly at 5,000 feet maximum for over 6 hours until extra fuel was used up and its containers thrown overboard. The following are notes from the log kept by Admiral Richard E. Byrd on his exploratory trip to and beyond the South Pole and into the interior of the Earth.
So it's interesting to me, and they're going to get ready to get into the log here. Many times in this book, they talk about how Byrd had not been read in on the United States flying saucer program, a round wing plane program. And we learn about in other chapters in the book how the United States have been secretly developing this, alongside the Germans all the whole time, right? But everything was so compartmentalized, the right hand never knows what the left hand is doing. So in the event, and I've said this in previous episodes, that in the event that Byrd does get captured or crashes and interrogated, there he won't know. He doesn't know about the flying saucer program that the United States is developing. Therefore, there's plausible deniability and no risk of that secret getting out. So here we are now, and I think it's going to segue into the actual log, the diary, the time-stamped diary of Byrd and Bennett moving basically on this reconnaissance mission.
On February 5th, 1946, the log begins. Catapulted from aircraft carrier with full tanks plus extra tanks, the carrier located about 300 miles due north of the McMurdo base. Clear skies, headed for the settlement there, reaching it about 6:50 a.m., circled the settlement, flew low, waving to those on the ground who waved in return. Byrd's flight from McMurdo, 400 miles due west to the first mountain chain's rim, was time-consuming inasmuch as it became expedient to burn off his aircraft's excess fuel. It was too overloaded to permit a sufficient gain in altitude. Arrived first designated area at 3 p.m. our time. Skies very clear. Coal sack would be seen very clearly overhead. Circled the area 3 times. Dropped a small American flag outside the window to claim for the USA. Reason for circling area was because aircraft was still unable to attain sufficient altitude to cruise over the 10,500-foot pass of the Axel Heiberg Glacier onto the central plateau where the supposed valley might begin into the planet's interior. Dropped the empty gasoline drums by means of ejection chute in aircraft floor. After several hours, gross weight reduced enough to gain height and cross the mountain rim. 4:20 p.m. Arrived at the edge of the valley. Sun was still bright in the sky. We started down following the contour of the ground, taking note of the terrain as we descended. At first, slope is gradual. Then it becomes steeper, as though one were going down the side of a mountain. Navigator now concerned that too much excess was burned off. 4:30 p.m. Ice cap beginning to get thinner, now beginning to see the exposed side of the mountain. Our outside temperature gauge has also recorded a 10-degree rise from 60 below zero, observed at the start of the descent. 5 p.m. We are still following a slope down. The ice is now very thin on the rocks that cover the slope. See some black spots that could be coal. Sun is still high in the sky. Temperature continues to show a slow, steady rise. It could even be tropical at the bottom of the valley. Maybe even a Shangri-La. Only time will tell. 5:30 p.m. Altimeter shows drop of about 1 mile since we entered the valley. We have traveled some 300+ miles in a downslope. Sides seem to be gradually getting steeper. 6 p.m. Ice completely gone, rocks now bare. Temperature shows a steady rise, getting warmer as we go deeper. All of a sudden, we seem to have hit a bottomless pit in which the sides slope straight down. Compass gone completely crazy and is not working at all. We are now spiraling downward. The sun is still shining, but gets dimmer as we descend. 7 p.m. We have been descending into the hole for almost an hour. Air outside continues getting warmer. A few minutes ago, we passed a small waterfall from which steam seemed to be coming. We circled so that our photographer could get a picture. As the sun was dim, we had to use floodlights to enable a good photograph. 8 p.m. We are nosing down as if traveling on level ground. The compass now not working at all. Altimeter has shown a steady fall. Instruments indicate our ground speed has slowed to about 50 miles per hour. Why are we traveling so slow? 9 p.m. Calculate we have traveled down for at least 100 miles from the top of the hole. Fuel is half gone. Dropped another empty gas tank. Extra gasoline cans held 100 gallons each, made of aluminum 1/8 inch thick. It fell horizontally toward the wall as if being pulled toward ground. Readings are crazy here. Haven't enough fuel to travel further into the earth. Bell has sounded, indicating fuel supply in main tanks half gone. We'll turn back and properly explore on future expedition. Our fuel will get us back if we start now. Radio is dead. No contact.
So that's interesting. So they make it so far into the interior before they have to turn around because they're at half fuel, right? They need that much, just as much to get back. But when they dropped that fuel tank, it got sucked to the wall instead of dropping straight down, which I find very interesting. It's so we're talking about a weird anomaly with the gravity, and this also adds credibility to the claim that the Earth's gravity is generated from the Earth's crust, not from the core of the planet. And that's how the whole hollow Earth concept is even able to exist. So you can live on the outside of the crust or the inside of the crust and still be pulled downwards toward the ground because the gravity belt is within the crust. And there's all who knows what the honeycombed cavern system looks like and how gravity affects those civilizations. But we learned about in a previous episode the artificial sun that they investigated that hangs in the center of the planet, which is absolutely fascinating. And who actually built that sun and how long it's been there I suppose that's still a mystery, at least to us.
Crew were confused because, though not weightless, they were able to walk up the sides and on roof of the plane and remain perpendicular. 4 synchronized clocks on board plus crew's watches kept time, but later it was shown all clocks and watches had gained 7 hours. 10 p.m. We are now traveling up at faster speed than we went down, and it is as if we were traveling along level ground. No explanation of it. It is starting to get cooler outside as we move towards the surface. 11 p.m. We are now getting near the top where the steep drop-off started. Have given orders to fly a right angle from our course to determine the diameter of the shaft. Cold is starting to get intense outside again. 12 o'clock, midnight. We have traveled for about an hour and we have returned to approximately our starting point. Navigator believes hole to be over 100 miles in diameter. We are now ascending and steadily gaining speed with wind in our rear. Temperature outside gets colder. Speed increases automatically.
So as they flew towards the center, it got warmer. Now they're heading back towards the surface and it's much colder. And they've just circumnavigated the hole, estimating it to be roughly over 100 miles in diameter. I think more accurate readings put it at 125 miles in diameter, according to some other information in this book. And I think at this point is when some flying saucers, they're encountered by some German flying saucers.
Footnote. Byrd later made a special report on how his speed changed without pilot aid from 300 miles per hour on the surface down to about 50 miles per hour descending the hole or shaft. He also told how the temperature went from minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface to more than plus 60 degrees Fahrenheit at the point of return during his descent.
Over 100-degree temperature difference.
They also reported seeing steam coming out of more than one hole in the rocks and discovered cloud formations within the 125-mile shaft. Their instruments also recorded a steady stream of air corning from deep within the shaft, which he felt accounted for their decreased speed in descent. The Admiral recorded that the feeling within the great shaft to the interior was uncanny, as if one were on a different planet. 1 a.m. We are now out of the shaft and going up on the slope. Have the movie camera taking shots of all rocks and looking for signs of life or vegetation as we ascend. Ground ice forming and getting thicker as we go up. 2 a.m. We are now at top of valley and will fly across to record the distance. Can barely see the sun corning up in the north. At this time of year, it stays up most of time, about 4 hours of night. 3 a.m. We are across the top, finally. Navigator calculated it approximately 500 miles in diameter at the top of the funnel. We are now heading for home base and the carrier. While in the throat of the funnel, or as Byrd called it, the spiral of the screw, the crew saw in the distance a formation of at least 5 UFOs converging from deeper in the interior. This sighting was also tracked on their navigational radar. As the UFO formation reached Byrd's unarmed plane, a craft positioned itself on each wingtip of the American plane. Byrd's photographer continued to photograph his silent pacers, which revealed clearly defined German swastikas on their tops and bottoms. Actually, the German circular winged planes made no warlike maneuvers, nor did they make radio contact with Byrd on that particular expedition. Bold but not foolish, Byrd's pilot was instructed to take no evasive action, and the photographer advised to continue photographing with the still cameras and automatics. Later, over 300 interior photos sent to the National Science Foundation and the National Archives would comprise the evidence which Admiral Byrd and his crew brought back. 1 p.m. We are now back on the aircraft carrier, having landed with no problem. After a good rest, we will fly to New Zealand tomorrow for immediate return to the United States. According to the clocks on board the Falcon aircraft, the flight lasted 31 hours, but aircraft carrier time showed the Falcon had been absent 23 hours. Upon his arrival at the aircraft, Byrd sent a coded report to Washington. Then the Admiral and his crew rested for 3 full days on the carrier. Besides the coded report, a fast reconnaissance aircraft took special documents and film to Washington via Sydney, Christchurch, and Panama. Upon Byrd's later arrival in the United States, the Admiral was immediately escorted to a top-secret meeting at the Pentagon with the heads of various armed services. Extracts from his log were read, and hundreds of feet of movie footage were shown and explained to the military brass. Today, the specially built Falcon is under wraps at Wright-Patterson Field, Dayton, Ohio. When the facts of this expedition are released by the Navy, the Byrd plane will go on display at the Smithsonian Institute.
Yeah, right. When the facts of the expedition are explained to the public, the Byrd's plane will go on display at the Smithsonian. I'll believe that when I see it. I highly doubt, seeing where we're at in 2026, it seems like they had a much different vision of the future back then. And they thought we would be much further along than we are. And we're in 2026 and arguing about the shape of the planet now. Nowhere near this type of disclosure. And, we have this, we're at the cusp of this alien disclosure. And then Obama does this statement yesterday or the other day on whatever show that was. And is assuring people that if it was true, we would know about it. And it's just more this cover up. It's like, oh my God, you want to pull your hair out. So it seems to me that they had a very much different vision of the future back during this time, thinking certainly by the year 2000, we would have flying cars and this amazing technology, and we would know about the interior civilizations. And we're not even remotely close to that publicly, and that's very sad.
The logbook of the Falcon, written by the navigator and signed by Byrd, was formerly stored in a safe in a single room in the National Archives, used.
1 second, I'm going to reply to a comment. Does this whole book conflict with this story about the Nazis landing in Washington in 1952 and pretty much taking over the U.S.? It almost seems like two different realities, or the 52 didn't happen. No, I absolutely think it actually corroborates it. They talk about a previous flyover that happened before 1952 as well. They don't highlight the 52 flyovers in this book, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. There's a lot of events that happened that aren't covered in this book. The way I see it, I think it absolutely corroborates the fact that that was the case. Um, you just have to really, there's not a complete puzzle here. So you have to start like reading. That's why I said earlier, you have to take, information from all these different books that are out. The Secrets of Antarctica, the Sands of Time series, the Genesis from the Space Race. Um, the there's another book I meant to reference there, but still, once you compile all of the information, it starts to paint this picture. And you have to like, not all of it is entirely accurate because most of the time people are um, they're relaying this information to the best of their knowledge, right? It's not like we have accurate details in most cases. This book seems to have a lot of accurate details, but we don't know if some of that is intentional misinformation or what the case may be. Nevertheless, it's all worthy of consideration and should not be ignored because, like one of the comments, the reviews says on the back of this book. Let me see. I don't know where it's at. Um, yeah, never mind. It's not on here. But one of the reviews says there's more disclosure in this book than we've ever seen today. Um, Something along those lines. Anyway, let me rewind this slightly and then we will keep going.
The logbook of the Falcon, written by the navigator and signed by Byrd, was formerly stored in a safe in a single room in the National Archives, used only for the custody of this historical document. It could not be seen without a presidential order. It was briefly examined by the authors in 1976 for 1 hour while two security personnel stood by. A second examination in 1977 was permitted, with the help of Senator Lawton Chiles of Florida.
So the author of this book and the researcher, this just told us that they gained access to these files and photographs, which is where the material for this book actually came from.
In 1978, the log was moved to underground historical vaults in the U.S. Air Force Kensington Tombs. After the movie showing of the Byrd Antarctic expedition, a meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was held with President Harry S. Truman presiding. Conclusions of that historic meeting were recorded by vote that immediate plans should be made for Byrd to return to the bottomless hole at the southern end of the world, penetrate into the interior, and locate the German base with its round-wing planes. The date for re-entry was set for February 16, 1947. The American squadron would again ride against the Germans on conventional, propeller-driven, fixed-wing aircraft. As for Byrd, he was still not told of the Jefferson Round-Wing project. Thus, there was continued the cover-up of America's activities in the Antarctic that was to prevent the public from knowing the true intentions of the United States and its post-war allies.
And that's the end of that chapter. So the these files are still locked up in the archives, I'm sure of it, and who knows where they've ended up today. Obviously, a lot of that has they don't keep this information in one location very long. Facilities shut down, they relocate files, they update the database from paper to digital. There's a lot happening with this information, and a lot of it's just simply been deleted and erased too, just to maintain the secrecy for the cover up, unfortunately. And it's probably disgusting the amount of stuff and evidence and artifacts and scripture that they've destroyed just to hide the truth of our existence. And certain whistleblowers say their whole MO is to destroy any evidence of God, any evidence that we are greater than we're told, as far as you know anything that goes against the story of evolution is not accepted. And we cover that in our um, Cahokia Mound documentary pretty well. We found a document uh, that literally talks about anything anterior to the discovery of Columbus is to be considered illegitimate. So that was the Smithsonian's MO the entire time. Anything that contradicted the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus in 1492 was to be deemed as illegitimate and basically thrown aside. And that's why we're in this situation today, because there has been an active cover-up since the inception of the Smithsonian, and that's the entire reason it was put into place. And it's laughable to think that they claim, oh, this Admiral Byrd's plane will be in the Smithsonian and honoring his expeditions and discovery. Like, Admiral Byrd is really the pioneer here. He is the one who discovered the entrances, at least in the modern age, right? There's many other accounts of inner earth testimonies. Why does this camera keep jumping? It's driving me nuts. Um, it's like this AI tracking, and I turn it off, and AI decides to turn it back on again. Anyway, there's many other stories and accounts of people discovering the interior of the planet and the holes at the poles, but officially, militarily, Admiral Byrd was that guy. And since, I mean, he has not gotten the recognition that he deserves, aside from people like us, telling the story and sharing his journey. So it's very interesting to me. Um, like I said earlier, like this is another great book on inner earth testimonies. It's called The Under People. You can only buy it used. It's super old. This was written, and man, when was this written? It's an old one. Let's see if I can find a date in here. See if I can find a date. 1969. So this is a compilation of Inner Earth and Hollow Earth testimonies. It's a short book. It was written in 1969, and it's absolutely fascinating. And these stories date back to the 1800s and the 1500s, and really just go way back in time. telling all these tales of a hollow Earth, And then 1980 rolls around. Interestingly enough, the same year that this information was all compiled by John B. Leith and Frank Hudson is the same exact year that allegedly Michael Aquino started the Flat Earth PSYOP. So they must have known that this information was being compiled, and there was a reason that this information, it was ready to roll in 1980, but it was withheld from publication until 2013. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason that that's when flat Earth you can start finding quote unquote evidence of a flat Earth. That's because it was an actual psyop that was being pushed to cover up this truth. And now there are millions upon millions of people that are believing in the flat Earth, and they'll laugh at stuff like this because space is fake, Earth is flat, whatever. Um, I don't mean to make fun of those people because everyone's just here trying to learn and they know we've been lied to for so long. So if everything else is a lie, why wouldn't the shape of the planet be a lie? But I think they're not trying to lie about the shape of the planet. They're trying to lie about what this place actually is and what's going on inside this place. So that's another, The Under People. I'll hold that book up again for you guys. You could look it up online. You have to buy it used. It's out of print. The Under People, The Startling Discovery of a Lost World, amazing documented facts about the bizarre inhabitants of the center of the earth. And then this is The Smoky God. This is the expanded edition, the updated expanded edition, which I highly recommend over the original book. The original book is a quick read. You can knock it out in a day. It's just a short testimony of their 2 years in Hollow Earth. But this is an expanded, updated version, which includes corroborating testimony. So as the story goes along here, they'll pause and they'll insert another piece of information that corroborates something that was actually shared in the original book. And then there's a whole separate second part of this book that just is another compilation of more Hollow Earth, Inner Earth testimonies. So another fantastic read. And Brad Olson's book here, The Secrets of Antarctica, it all corroborates everything that this Genesis for the Space Race book covers, but even more layers of that. And then the Sands of Time story dovetails in with all that and fills in even more blanks. Um, you know, like I said, maybe not all the facts are straight, but a picture is starting to be painted. We're starting to see the puzzle come together. And it's absolutely fascinating. We're not going to get it from the government. Absolutely not. I don't believe that anymore. I used to think when I was young in my journey and naive that we were going to get disclosure and they were going to tell us all the stuff. I think that's utter bullshit at this point, and they're not going to tell us anything. It's a controlled, scripted narrative. These pastors who are all being briefed right now, the entire thing has PSYOP written all over it. Written all over it. This is a show that they're putting on for us. And not saying there's no truth to it, and it's a great step forward. I definitely agree with that. But they're still covering their tracks. And this is a very controlled, limited hangout disclosure we're experiencing now. So um, let me just check the chat here. Timeline jumps seem to be a play. Yeah, I mean, we're also talking about that. This is one of the things that the Sands of Time outlines beautifully is that this is a temporal war. There's time travel involved, and there's multiple timelines, and there's parallel realities, and there's so many other parts to this equation that just make all of this really, really complex and really hard to follow. So there's so many data points worthy of consideration. Will we ever have like a good chronological story that tells it all? I think we have a rough one being put together now, but we'll see what that looks like as more information is revealed as we move forward with the advent of AI and all the stuff where we can just access this information at our fingertips now. Uh, John Warner, is that John Warner in here? U.S. and Germany had StarCraft programs in the 40s. Um, Maybe that's a different John W. Yeah, according to this material, they began their development and reverse engineering projects in the late 30s, mid to late 30s. And each, obviously, different nations were working with different groups of extraterrestrials and different reverse engineering, different technologies. And Both of them had like like I said earlier, the Navy, the U.S. had spies in Germany. Germany had spies here, and then the whole Operation Paperclip, Project Paperclip, that was actually an agreement between the United States and Germany. That wasn't like an invasion. That was an agreement. And at the very top, there was a meme the other day that I shared. I'm going to actually read it because this is precisely how it all plays out. It says, in chess, the white and black pieces are bitter enemies, but those who move the pieces are usually good friends. And that's what we're dealing with here. So if you look at Germany and the United States and all warring nations as the chess pieces, they're bitter enemies. But those who move the pieces are good friends. So at the very top, all of the nations are allied in these secret space programs and the interplanetary conglomerate and all this stuff that we hear about from the SSPs. They're all, no one's at war at the top. They're all actually working together in these space programs. Now, yes, there are warring factions and stuff like that, but in some capacity, they all have to work together. And we see that displayed in movies all the time. And, two warring nations or countries, suddenly they have a common enemy and they'll unite and temporarily, sometimes maybe, maybe forever. It just depends on the scenario. There's such a complex history. It's really, really impossible to understand it all, but we're doing our best. So let me pull up the chat here. And I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, guys. Thank you for joining me today. I have some things to do. The Rise of the Guardians conference is this weekend. Team Lights conference here in Sedona. And Journey to Truth will have a booth set up there. I'm set to speak on a panel on Sunday. So I have a lot of work to do coming up this weekend for that. And a lot of good friends will be coming in town. So I'm looking forward to it. It should be a good time. And I think that's it, guys. I'm gonna wrap it up and stay tuned for the next episode. I'm not sure which direction I'm gonna go yet. I could do more chapters from this book, but I think I'm gonna go to Sands of Time next because there's something in one of the Sands of Times books that I remember being very important that I feel like it's worthy of going back to and sharing it with you guys. So I'm gonna look for that and see what we come up with. But there's never ending information to cover, and it's amazing because it just provides me with plenty of content to create for you guys, and as a passion project of mine, researching the true history of this stuff. So thank you guys for being here. Love you. Can't do this channel without you, and look forward to the next episode. Have a great day.